Okay, so the next video for section 5.1 is going to focus on an isosceles triangle. So remember, an isosceles triangle has two congruent sides, so at least two congruent sides. So we know that we have two congruent sides, and the two congruent sides we call the legs, and the non-congruent side we call the base. And an isosceles triangle also has a vertex. Okay, there's obviously three vertices in this triangle, but there's the vertex angle. That's the angle and the vertex that are between the two legs. Okay, and then we've got a base angle here, formed between a leg and a base angle here, formed between the leg and the base. Okay, so the base angles theorem says, so if you have an isosceles triangle or two sides of a triangle are congruent, then the angles opposite of those sides are also congruent. So this side AC, the angle opposite of it is angle B, and this side AB, the angle opposite of it is AC. So if segment AB is congruent to segment AC, then angle B is congruent to angle C. Okay. The converse of the base angles theorem says if you have two congruent angles in a triangle, then the sides opposite them are congruent. So AB would be congruent to AC. So if angle B is congruent to angle C, then segment AB is congruent to segment AC. So that's the base angles theorem and the converse of the base angles theorem. So if you have two congruent sides, you have two congruent base angles. If you have two congruent base angles, then you have two congruent sides, making it isosceles. Okay, so when we extend that in a more specific case, we get the corollary to the base angles theorem. So a more specific triangle than an isosceles triangle in terms of congruence is an equilateral triangle. And so the corollary says if a triangle is equilateral, then it is equiangular. So if all three sides are congruent, if AB is congruent to BC, is congruent to AC, then all three angles are congruent. Angle A is congruent to angle B is congruent to angle C. And this corollary also has a converse. So corollary to the converse of the base angles theorem says if a triangle is equiangular, so if angle A is congruent to angle B is congruent to angle C, all three angles are congruent, then it is equilateral. All three sides are congruent. AB is congruent to BC is congruent to AC. Okay. So at this point, go ahead and stop. Try out those examples right there, 12 through 16, and then you can check them on Google Classroom.